Hello, my friend. The world of magic, filled with legends and ancient tales, is opening its gates once again. Tonight, in the Gryffindor dormitory by the crackling fireplace, I will share another story with my friends. Join us, for the magic is about to come alive.
It began on a foggy morning beside the Black Lake, that wide, glimmering stretch of water that lay in the shadow of Hogwarts Castle. The mist clung low to the surface, veiling the towers in silver haze and muffling every sound, so that even the croak of a frog seemed strange and distant. Hagrid stood by the water's edge, his great boots half sunk in the damp earth, peering into the mist with narrowed eyes. His enormous hands were stuffed deep in his moleskin overcoat, and beside him, Fang, his boarhound, sniffed uneasily at the air. Something wasn't right. The lake, usually calm at dawn, was restless that morning. Ripples kept spreading from the center, though there was no wind. Now and then, a hollow gloop echoed over the surface, like the sound of something heavy moving beneath the water. Hagrid frowned, scratching his wild beard. "That's odd," he muttered to Fang. "No squids ever made noises like that." Fang whimpered softly, pressing close to Hagrid's leg. For the last few nights there had been strange goings-on by the lake, distant wails that carried up to the castle windows and flashes of light under the water, blue and cold as moonfire. Even the mer-people, who usually kept to themselves, had sent word that something dark was stirring in their territory. When Professor McGonagall heard the news, she had called Hagrid to her office. "Hagrid," she'd said, adjusting her square spectacles, "we can't have half the students peering out their windows every night wondering if the lake's about to swallow the school. I want you to take a look." Discreetly? "Of course, Professor," Hagrid had answered, chest swelling with pride. "Wouldn't want anything hurting the lake creatures." And so there he was now, squinting into the fog, a lantern swinging in his hand, and Fang at his side. Suddenly, a deep tremor rolled through the ground, faint but unmistakable. The surface of the lake bulged outward for a moment, as though something massive was shifting below. The light on Hagrid's lantern quivered, sending long shadows dancing over the rocks. "Easy now," he said softly. "Ain't nothing to worry about, Fang. Maybe just the giant squid stretching its arms." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. A moment later, the lake grew still again, eerily still. The ripples vanished, the tremor faded, and only the distant cry of a gull broke the silence. Then a single object floated up from the depths. A long silvery scale. It drifted toward the bank, catching the lantern light as it turned. It was unlike any fish or serpent Hagrid had ever seen, thin as glass, yet tough as metal, and faintly shimmering with a bluish hue. Hagrid knelt to pick it up. The scale was cold, colder than the water itself, and pulsed faintly like a living thing. "Blimey," he whispered. "What are you then?" Before he could examine it further, Fang barked sharply. Hagrid looked up and froze. Across the lake, where the fog hung thickest, a shape moved beneath the water. It was enormous, coiling slowly just below the surface. The ripples spread wider, and Hagrid could make out the dim outline of something long and serpentine, something that should not be there. Then it was gone. The water closed over as if nothing had disturbed it. Hagrid stood motionless for a long time, heart thudding against his ribs. The forest behind him was silent, the air heavy and cold. At last he exhaled, slipping the strange scale into his coat pocket. "Right," he muttered to Fang. "Reckon we'll need to keep an eye on this. Whatever's in there, it's not one of ours." As he turned back toward the castle, the lantern's light gleamed briefly on the water, and deep beneath, in the farthest shadows of the lake, 2 faint golden eyes blinked open. They followed Hagrid as he climbed the hill, their glow fading slowly into the darkness. That night, while most of Hogwarts slept soundly in their beds, a soft current stirred in the black lake. Bubbles rose to the surface and burst quietly, one after another, until the water grew still again. From the forest's edge, a lonely figure stood watching, half giant, half guardian, and all heart, unaware that he had just woken a legend, long forgotten, beneath the castle's depths. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The mist had lifted from the lake, and sunlight danced across the water in trembling shards of gold. But Hagrid's mind was heavy with unease. He'd hardly slept a wink, lying awake in his cabin as the wind moaned across the grounds. The strange scale he had found lay on his table, glinting faintly even in the dark. He'd tried to convince himself it was nothing to fret about. Maybe a trick of the light or some new creature wandering in from the mountains. But every time he looked at that scale, his stomach tightened. There was power in it. Old, cold power. By mid-morning, Hagrid decided he'd best take a closer look at the lake again. He bundled into his moleskin coat, tucked the shining scale into his pocket, and whistled for Fang. "Come on, you great lump," he said. "We're going for a bit of a walk." The grounds were quiet except for the cawing of crows and the distant chatter of students hurrying to lessons. The castle loomed behind him, proud and ancient, and the forbidden forest whispered softly to his right. When he reached the water's edge, he stopped short. Someone was already there. A small figure in a woolen cloak crouched beside the lake, tossing crumbs into the water. When she turned, her pale hair gleamed in the sunlight. "Morning, Luna," Hagrid said, surprised. "What are you doing out here so early?" "Oh, hello, Hagrid," said Luna Lovegood dreamily, rising to her feet. "I was feeding the lake creatures. I think they get lonely sometimes." She looked out across the glimmering surface. The mer people were singing last night. Their voices sounded frightened. "Frightened, eh?" Hagrid rubbed his beard, frowning. "You didn't happen to see anything strange, did you?" Luna tilted her head thoughtfully. "There was a light under the water, blue and flickering. At first I thought it might be the giant squid having a dance, but it didn't move right. It was angry." Hagrid sighed. "Aye, that fits. Something's stirring down there, no doubt about it." Just then another voice called out from behind. "Professor Hagrid, wait for us." Neville Longbottom came puffing down the slope, clutching a small notebook and looking rather nervous. "Professor Sprout said you might need help identifying something aquatic. I thought I could, lend a hand?" Hagrid chuckled. "Well, that's kinda her and kinda you." "I was thinking I could use another pair of eyes." So it was that Hagrid, Luna, Neville, and Fang stood together by the lakeshore, peering into the depths. The morning sunlight shimmered on the surface, but below it, the darkness looked endless. Hagrid reached into his pocket and drew out the silvery scale. It flashed faintly in the light. Neville's eyes widened. "Merlin's beard," he breathed. "That's not from any freshwater creature I know. The structures, well, it's like armor plating." Luna leaned close, her expression dreamy but intent. "It feels sad," she murmured, "as if it's been hurt." Before Hagrid could answer, a ripple spread across the water. then another. Something large was moving beneath. The students stepped back instinctively. Fang growled low in his throat. "Get behind me," Hagrid said sharply. He drew his pink umbrella, gripping it like a wand. The ripples grew wider, faster. A long shadow glided beneath the surface, smooth, serpentine, silent. Then with a sudden splash, something shot up from the depths. Water erupted high into the air, drenching them all. Hagrid shielded Luna and Neville as a huge gleaming shape broke the surface. Not a monster, not yet, but a warning of one. For an instant they saw the curve of a scaled tail, enormous and glimmering blue-green. Then it vanished again, sinking back into the dark. The lake fell silent once more, save for the steady drip of water from Hagrid's beard. Neville trembled. What was that? Hagrid exhaled slowly. Something big. Something hurt. He looked down at the scale again. It had begun to glow more brightly, as if awakened by the creature's presence. "That's enough for today," he said gruffly. "Back to the castle, both of you. I'll keep watch tonight." Luna gazed out across the water. "Be careful, Hagrid. Some things in the lake remember the old magic, and not all of them are kind." Her words lingered in his ears long after they had gone. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, Hagrid returned to his hut and lit a fire. The silvery scale lay on the table, casting ghostly reflections on the walls. He stared at it, lost in thought. The creature, whatever it was, seemed restless. He could feel it in his bones as surely as a storm in the air. After a long moment, he rose, took his lantern, and strode out again toward the lake. The night was still, and the stars burned bright overhead. The castle's windows glowed softly across the water, and the dark trees whispered like watchful sentinels. At the shore, he knelt, holding the lantern low. "If you can hear me," he said quietly, "I don't mean you harm, but I can't have you scaring the students, understand? Come on, show yourself." The water shimmered faintly, then deep below, a light began to bloom. Blue, swirling and slow, it rose toward him, pulsing in rhythm with the beating of his heart. The surface broke with a sigh, and there it was, the creature's face. It was vast and ancient, scaled like silver glass, eyes golden and full of sorrow, its body coiled endlessly behind it, a serpent born of the lake's deepest shadows. Hagrid gasped, but held his ground. "Easy now," he murmured, "I won't hurt you." The serpent tilted its head, studying him. For a moment the two regarded each other, and no, man and monster, both guardians in their own way. Then Hagrid saw it. A dark, jagged shard buried in the creature's side, faintly glowing with black light. The serpent shuddered, twisting in pain, and the glow in its eyes flared red. The ground trembled. Waves crashed against the shore. Fang barked wildly. All right, Hagrid cried. "Hold still. I'll help you, I swear." But before he could reach it, the serpent gave a terrible cry, a sound that echoed off the castle walls and into the forest, and plunged back into the depths, vanishing once more. The waves slowly calmed. The lake grew still. Hagrid sank to his knees, drenched and breathless. "Something's hurting it," he whispered. "Something cursed." And far below, in the blackness, the serpent coiled around itself, eyes glowing faintly red, a creature of power and pain, bound to the dark thing buried in its flesh. All that night the wind prowled across the grounds of Hogwarts, sighing through the trees and stirring ripples upon the black lake. The castle slept beneath a veil of stars, but Hagrid did not. He sat before his fire, staring at the strange silver scale that now lay dull and cold upon his table. It no longer shone with the soft blue light from before. It had gone gray, lifeless, as though drained of its magic. Fang snored at his feet, yet even in his sleep the dog whimpered now and again, paws twitching as if he dreamed of the monster in the water. Hagrid rubbed a weary hand across his eyes. He had seen many beasts in his time. Dragons, giants, centaurs, even acromantulas. But none had stirred his heart quite like this one. The serpent had not been wicked. He could tell it had been in pain, and that pain had turned it wild. At dawn, Hagrid pulled on his heavy coat and strode up toward the castle. He knew there was one person who might help him understand what he had seen, though she was not exactly known for keeping her feet on the ground. He found Luna Lovegood in the greenhouse, humming softly to herself as she sprinkled powder over a row of puffapods. Her pale hair shimmered in the sunlight streaming through the glass, and a necklace of butterbeer corks hung loosely around her neck. "Morning, Luna," Hagrid greeted her. "Sorry to bother you so early, but I think I need your eyes on something." She looked up, smiling. "You look tired, Hagrid. Did you dream of the lake?" Hagrid blinked. Not dream exactly. More like, saw it with me own eyes." He held out the dull, silvery scale. Luna took it gently between her fingers. Her gaze went distant for a moment, as if she were listening to something far away. Then she nodded solemnly. "This belonged to an Aethian serpent," she said softly. "An ancient water guardian. They used to live in the high lakes of the north, long before Hogwarts was built. I didn't think any survived." "Aethian serpent?" Hagrid repeated. "I've heard of 'em in old stories. Said they kept the balance of the lakes, stopping dark magic from taking root in the water." Luna nodded again. "Yes, but something's hurting this one, something old and cruel." She handed the scale back. "There's a curse in it. You can still feel the echo." Hagrid frowned, his brow furrowing like storm clouds. "A curse, eh? That explains the shard I saw on its side. Looked like metal, but it burned dark, like it was alive." "That would be dark war magic," Luna said thoughtfully. "There were spells used during the First Wizarding War, the twisted living creatures. The lake remembers those things, Hagrid. Water never forgets." He gave a low whistle. "So this serpent, she's suffering from something that's been in her for decades? Maybe longer." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the greenhouse, the wind brushed against the glass, and the lake glittered in the distance like liquid silver. At last, Luna said, "If you want to help her, you'll have to go deep. Deeper than the merpeople's village. The curse won't fade on its own." Hagrid gave a grim nod. "Then I reckon I'll be going down there tonight." He left the greenhouse with determination in his stride and a heaviness in his heart. He could not tell McGonagall yet, not until he knew more. The last thing he wanted was to see the castle alarmed or the ministry called in. If this was a creature in pain, then it was Hagrid's duty to ease it, not see it hunted. The day passed in restless waiting. He prepared as best he could, a length of enchanted rope, a lantern charmed to glow underwater, and a bubblehead charm he'd borrowed from Professor Flitwick's notes. Not his strongest skill, but it would have to do. By nightfall, the lake was once more shrouded in mist. The moon hung low, pale as bone, and the surface of the water glimmered faintly under its light. Fang watched nervously from the shore as Hagrid waded in, water lapping at his boots. "Stay here, Fang," Hagrid murmured. "Guard the bank. If I'm not back before dawn, well, bark loud enough to wake the whole castle." The dog whimpered, but obeyed. With a deep breath, Hagrid raised his umbrella and murmured the incantation. A bubble of shimmering air formed around his head, sealing him from the water. Then, with a last look at the moonlit towers above, he dove beneath the surface. The world below was silent, vast and cold. Schools of tiny silver fish darted past his lantern's glow, scattering like sparks. Great curtains of green weed swayed gently, whispering against the rocks. As Hagrid descended deeper, the light from above faded until only his lantern remained, a single golden star in the blackness. Shapes loomed in the shadows, pillars of stone, the ruins of some forgotten age. The mer people's dwellings came into view, carved houses of coral and shell, their windows glowing with soft blue fire. Curious eyes peered from the darkness as he passed. "Hagrid the groundskeeper," came a voice low and echoing. A mere woman with long silver hair swam toward him, carrying a spear tipped with pearl. "Why do you trespass in the deep?" "I ain't trespassing," Hagrid replied, bubbles rising from his mouth. "I'm looking for something hurting your waters. A great serpent." The merwoman's eyes narrowed. "We have seen it. It thrashes in the trenches, wounding all who draw near. It carries a piece of darkness in its flesh. The younglings fear to swim there." "Then ye know what I'm after," Hagrid said. "Can you guide me to it?" The merwoman hesitated. "Few dare. But the beast is dying. If you can end its pain, we will not stop you." She gestured toward a chasm yawning in the lake bed below, a jagged wound in the earth. From its depths pulsed a faint red glow. Hagrid thanked her, then began his descent into the trench. The water grew colder, thicker, until it felt like swimming through fog. The light dimmed to almost nothing. He heard it before he saw it, a slow rhythmic thudding like the heartbeat of the lake itself. And then he saw her. The Ethonan serpent lay coiled in the darkness, scales dulled and cracked, golden eyes flickering weakly. The cursed shard jutted from her side, pulsing with sickly light. Around it the water shimmered red and small fish floated lifelessly, their bodies twisted by the dark energy. "Ah, ye poor thing," Hagrid whispered. "What have they done to ye?" The serpent's eyes opened fully. She stared at him, and for a moment he felt her thoughts brush his. A wordless cry of pain, echoing like thunder in his chest. He reached out slowly, extending one massive hand toward the shard. The closer he came, the stronger the dark magic pulsed. It burned against his skin even through the water. The serpent quivered, but did not strike. "I'll get it out," he said softly. "Hold still now." Hagrid gripped the shard. The instant he touched it, fire lanced up his arm. A roar tore from his throat, bubbles bursting around him. The shard resisted, twisting as though alive. He pulled harder. The serpent screamed, the sound reverberating through the water, shaking the trench walls. With a final wrench, the shard tore free. A jagged piece of black iron glowing with runes of blood-red light. Hagrid clutched it, his arm seared and shaking. The serpent collapsed, motionless, and the glow from the shard dimmed at once. Then silence. For a heartbeat, Hagrid feared she had died. But then her body stirred. The dullness lifted from her scales, silver light spreading like dawn through her enormous frame. Her eyes opened again, not red now, but deep gold, calm and grateful. She bowed her head, and though she made no sound, Hagrid felt her voice in his mind, ancient and soft, as the lake's whisper, "Thank you." Then she turned, coils gliding through the water and vanished into the black beyond the trench. Hagrid floated there, panting, the cursed shard still burning faintly in his grasp. He looked down at it, uneasy. The red runes were fading, but not gone. He had freed the serpent, but the darkness that had bound her was not yet finished. Above him, the light of the surface shimmered faintly, and Hagrid began his long ascent. The shard held close, and a heavy thought in his heart, that the true danger might still be waiting above. The first light of dawn spilled over the mountains as Hagrid broke through the surface of the black lake. He gasped, pulling in a great lungful of air, his enormous chest heaving. The bubblehead charm burst with a faint pop, and the water around him glimmered with a thin, eerie mist. In his fist, clutched tight and still faintly glowing, was the shard of black iron. He waded to shore, every step heavy, his arms stinging where the metal had burned his skin. Fang barked wildly when he saw him, bounding along the water's edge, tail whipping. "Easy, Fang, easy," Hagrid grunted, half laughing, half exhausted. "I'm back, ain't I?" The morning sun caught on the shard as he lifted it from the water. Its glow had faded, but thin veins of red light still flickered faintly across its surface like dying embers. It hummed in his hand, a low and hungry sound, as though it resented being torn from the creature's flesh. "Dark magic, right enough," Hagrid muttered, "and nasty work, too." He wrapped it in a scrap of canvas and shoved it deep into his coat pocket. Whatever curse lay inside, he wanted it nowhere near the lake again. By the time he trudged back to his hut, the castle was stirring awake. He lit a fire and hung a kettle, shaking water from his hair like a wet bear. The shard he placed carefully on the table where it lay motionless, for a time. The morning passed in uneasy silence. Fang paced the room, whining now and again, glancing toward the table. Even Norberta, his young dragon living in the forest paddock, had been restless when he checked on her, snapping at shadows, as if she sensed something foul in the air. It wasn't until after lunch that Hagrid noticed the smell. Faint at first, like burning metal, then stronger. He turned. The shard had begun to smoke. "Blast it!" he hissed, hurrying over. The runes were glowing again, brighter now, bleeding light across the wooden surface. The canvas he had wrapped around it blackened and crumbled away, as if the thing refused to be hidden. He snatched his umbrella from the wall, muttering a protective charm. A faint spark leapt from the tip, but it barely dulled the glow. The shard pulsed once, and then with a sharp crack, a fissure split down its length. A cold gust swept through the hut, rattling the windows and snuffing the fire in the hearth. The temperature dropped at once. Fang whimpered and hid beneath the table. Out of the cracked metal spilled a shadow. It slithered across the floor like smoke, coiling and twisting. It had no true shape, but its eyes, two narrow slits of crimson light, flickered to life within the darkness. Hagrid stumbled back. "No, you don't," he growled. "Back where you came from." The shadow hissed, its voice thin and cold as winter wind. "You freed the vessel, fool of flesh. The curse is mine to keep." Hagrid lifted his umbrella like a wand. "Not in me hut it ain't," he bellowed. "Finite." A flash of blue light burst from the umbrella, striking the shadow squarely. The darkness screamed, not loud but sharp enough to pierce the air, and recoiled. The shard on the table rattled violently, the red light flaring once more before dimming again. Then silence. Smoke drifted lazily through the air, curling like the last breath of something dying. The fire in the hearth flickered back to life of its own accord. Hagrid stood still for several moments, breathing hard. His heart pounded, his burned arm throbbing. "Well," he muttered, setting down his umbrella, "that explains what was wrong with the beast." He picked up the shard again, now cold to the touch, though faint traces of crimson still lingered in its cracks. Whatever had been inside was wounded, not destroyed. He could feel it, like a restless whisper at the edge of hearing. That evening, he carried the shard to Dumbledore's old tower. The room was still much as the headmaster had left it, though dustier now. McGonagall had taken to using her office elsewhere, and so the place remained a quiet sanctum of forgotten wonders. Hagrid climbed the spiral staircase slowly, the candlelight flickering over portraits of long-gone headmasters who whispered to each other as he passed. At the top, he paused before the perch that once held Fawkes, the phoenix. It was empty now, though faint ashes still gleamed in the golden bowl. Hagrid sighed softly. "Wish you were still around, Fawkes. Ye'd know what to do with this mess." He set the shard upon Dumbledore's old desk and unwrapped it. The golden instruments around the room ticked and hummed faintly, reacting to its presence. A compass spun wildly. A crystal globe clouded over. From the portrait behind the desk, a familiar voice spoke. "My dear Hagrid, you seem troubled." It was Dumbledore's painted likeness, eyes twinkling as they had in life. Hagrid smiled faintly. "I reckon you could say that, Professor. Found something nasty in the lake. Dark curse, deep magic. Hurt one of the water guardians. I pulled it out, but now it's acting up." Dumbledore's eyes drifted to the shard. Yes. I feared something of this kind might still linger beneath the waters." "You knew about it?" "In part," said the portrait. "During the war, a relic of dark enchantment was cast into the lake to hide it from the Order's pursuit. We believed the merpeople had sealed it away, but dark magic has a way of finding life to cling to. It must have bound itself to the guardian you found." Hagrid frowned. "Can it be destroyed?" "Destroyed? Perhaps not. Contained? Yes. But it will fight you. That magic has no purpose but to survive." The portrait's expression grew grave. "Be careful, my friend. If the curse cannot bind to the serpent again, it will seek another host." Hagrid felt a chill crawl up his neck. "Another host? You mean—" Dumbledore's painted gaze held his. "You, Hagrid, or anyone who keeps it too near for too long." For a moment the room was utterly still. Hagrid looked down at the shard, then at his bandaged arm. The faint red burn marks seemed to pulse faintly under the skin. "Well," he said hoarsely, "reckon I'll need to make sure it doesn't find anything worth clinging to." He wrapped the shard again and tucked it under his arm. "Thank you, Professor. I'll keep it safe." Dumbledore smiled faintly. "I trust you will." As Hagrid descended the staircase once more, the portraits murmured softly after him, their painted eyes following his every step. Outside, the night wind rose again, sweeping over the lake and carrying with it a faint whisper, one that might have been the serpent's distant call, or something darker still. When he reached his hut, Hagrid placed the shard in a locked chest, bound with chains and runes of protection. He sat before the fire long into the night, listening to Fang's slow breathing and the faint creaks of the old cabin. Yet now and then, beneath the crackle of the flames, he thought he heard it again. A voice like cold water running over stone, whispering from within the chest. "You freed the vessel?" it murmured, almost tenderly. Now I will find another." Hagrid shivered, staring into the fire, his hand resting on the table beside his half-empty mug of tea. Outside, the black lake lay still and silent, the moonlight rippling faintly across its surface. But deep beneath, unseen, the golden eyes of the Aethonan serpent glowed softly in the dark, as if watching over him from afar. And somewhere in the distance, the whispering voice of the curse began to stir once more. For 3 nights, the chest remained sealed, and the shard inside it lay still. Hagrid went about his duties as best he could, feeding the thestrals, mending the paddock fence, and brewing a fresh batch of salamander tonic for Professor Sprout. But his thoughts never strayed far from the thing locked away beneath his hut. He could feel its presence as one feels the weight of a storm building in the distance, unseen but heavy on the air. The students had begun to whisper again. Some claimed they heard voices near the lake at dusk. Others swore the water had turned darker, black as ink beneath the moon. Even the mer-people kept to deeper waters. Whatever peace had returned to the Black Lake after Hagrid freed the serpent was slowly unraveling. By the 4th morning, Hagrid knew he could not keep the matter to himself any longer.
The burns on his arm had darkened, faint red veins spreading from the wound like threads of smoke. It didn't hurt so much as throb, a dull pulse that beat in rhythm with his heart. He trudged up to the castle, the November wind biting through his coat, and sought out Professor McGonagall. She was in her office, surrounded by parchment and quills that scratched busily of their own accord. The fire behind her burned bright, throwing a warm glow across her stern face. "Hagrid," she said, peering over her spectacles. "You look as though you haven't slept in days." "Can't say I have, Professor," he admitted. "Something's wrong down by the lake again. I think it's following me." McGonagall frowned. "Following you?" He unwrapped his bandaged arm and held it out. The faint red lines pulsed beneath his skin. "It's the curse, Professor. The shard I found, it's trying to latch on. I reckon the serpent was keeping it trapped all these years. When I pulled it out," her face hardened. "You brought it back with you." "Aye." McGonagall rose from her chair, her robes whispering across the floor. "Where is it now?" "In a chest under me hut, sealed with every protective charm I could manage. But I don't know how long that'll hold." She walked to the window, looking out toward the shimmering lake below. "I'll send for Professor Flitwick and Madame Pomfrey at once. We'll examine the wound and see what can be done. As for the artifact, no one is to go near it until we've made it safe. Do you understand?" "Yes, Professor." Before the day was out, half the staff had gathered in Hagrid's hut. Flitwick fluttered about the chest with his wand, muttering spells that glowed blue and gold in the dim light. Sprout stood beside Hagrid, arms folded, watching anxiously. "It's humming," Flitwick said at last. "I can feel the energy, old, tangled, angry. This isn't a mere curse. It's a fragment of living magic." McGonagall's lips thinned. "Then it must be destroyed." Flitwick shook his head. "I fear it cannot be, not by ordinary means. Such enchantments are woven to endure. They feed on the fear and strength of those who try to fight them." As he spoke, the chest rattled sharply. Everyone stepped back. A low, throbbing hum filled the hut, rising to a pitch that made the floorboards tremble. The lamps flickered, the shadows lengthened. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound ceased. The chest lay still. Flitwick lowered his wand. "It's aware of us." That night, Hagrid was forbidden from sleeping in his cabin.
He was moved to a guest room in the castle, though he protested mightily. "I can't leave Fang," he argued. "He'll be frightened on his own." "Fang will be fine," said McGonagall firmly. "You, on the other hand, are not to return to that hut until we are certain it is safe." So Hagrid spent the night in the stone-walled quiet of the castle, lying awake and listening to the distant creaks of the old building. It felt strange being away from the forest, from the comfort of his own hearth. When he finally drifted into uneasy sleep, his dreams were filled with water. He saw the black lake, vast and moonlit, rippling under a sky of swirling mist. From its depths rose the Ithonan serpent, her eyes like molten gold. She looked upon him in silence, and then he saw the shard again, no longer bound in iron, but floating freely, a burning coal of red light. It pulsed once, twice, then split apart into 1,000 tendrils of smoke that slithered through the water toward the castle. Hagrid awoke with a shout. Sweat ran down his face, and the fire in the hearth had gone cold. He looked at his arm and froze. The red veins had deepened, spreading up to his shoulder, glowing faintly through the skin. "Not good," he muttered, swinging his legs from the bed. "Not good at all." He dressed hurriedly and stormed down the corridors, ignoring the portraits that scolded him for wandering about before dawn. He reached the front doors and shoved them open, the chill air biting his face. The lake shimmered faintly in the distance. When he reached his hut, the door was already ajar. "Fang," he called. No answer, only silence and the faint scent of ash. He stepped inside. The lamps were out and frost coated the windows. The chest lay overturned in the middle of the floor, its chains shattered. The canvas wrappings were torn to ribbons. The shard was gone. "Blast it all!" Hagrid bellowed. He dropped to one knee, scanning the floor. Strange patterns were burned into the wood, circles and lines that glowed faintly red. Then he saw the prints, not footprints, but streaks, like the drag of something heavy across the ground, leading straight out the open door and toward the lake. "Fang!" he called again. A whimper answered him from outside. The dog crouched near the water's edge, trembling. The surface of the lake was calm, but something dark churned beneath, a shifting shadow that circled like a storm. Hagrid felt the same pulse in his arm, stronger now, pulling him toward the shore. The curse had found its way home. He waded in up to his knees, the cold biting through his trousers. "I'm coming, girl," he muttered. "Hold on, I'll fix this yet." A sudden wave rose, striking him square in the chest. He staggered back as the water erupted, a column of foam and spray bursting into the air, and out of it came the serpent, her silver body glistening, her eyes wild and blazing red. "No," Hagrid whispered. "Not again." The shard had rejoined her, burying itself once more in her side, but now the light that burned within it was stronger, darker, alive. The creature hissed, coiling through the shallows, her massive tail cracking against the water. "Listen to me," Hagrid shouted, holding up his hands. "It's me, Hagrid. I freed you before, remember? Don't let it take you." The serpent's eyes flickered gold for an instant, then red again. She opened her jaws and loosed a roar that shook the trees. Waves crashed against the bank, sending Fang fleeing for cover. The water guardian had become a weapon once more. Hagrid drew his umbrella, heart pounding. He knew he couldn't fight her, not without hurting her, but he couldn't let her reach the castle either. "All right then," he muttered grimly. "Guess we're doing this the hard way." He raised the umbrella and with a shout sent a blazing arc of light into the air. The spell struck the lake with a thunderous crack, illuminating the water in white fire. The serpent screamed, thrashing violently, but the light held her fast. Steam rose, hissing like serpents of its own. Hagrid's muscles strained as he poured every ounce of strength into the spell. "Let it go," he roared. "You're stronger than it. Fight it." For a heartbeat, everything went still. Then, with a shudder that shook the lake to its depths, the serpent went limp. The red glow flickered and dimmed. The shard tore free from her side once more and fell into the water with a hiss like quenched metal. Hagrid stumbled forward, gasping. The serpent sank back into the depths, her form vanishing beneath the rippling surface. When at last the lake grew still, the only sound was the ragged rhythm of Hagrid's breath. He fell to his knees on the shore, exhausted. The shard was gone again, lost somewhere beneath the waves, but this time he knew it would not stay there forever. He looked toward the castle silhouetted against the dawn and whispered, "There's something evil in that lake, and it's not done with us yet." Far out on the water, a faint red shimmer pulsed once more before fading into the deep. The morning after the serpent's second awakening dawned cold and gray. The skies hung low over the castle, heavy with the promise of rain, and a bitter wind swept across the lake. No laughter rose from the grounds that day. The students had been warned to stay clear of the shore, and word had spread quickly through the halls that something dark had risen again from the deep. Hagrid stood outside his hut, soaked to the knees, staring out at the water. The surface lay still now, deceptively calm, but every so often faint ripples shivered outward from its center, as though something below was turning in uneasy sleep. He could still see the flash of the serpent's red eyes in his mind. The pain, the fury, the struggle against the curse that would not release its hold. Behind him, footsteps crunched on the gravel. McGonagall approached, her cloak drawn tightly around her shoulders, her expression grim. Beside her walked Flitwick and Madame Pomfrey, and even the unshakable little Charms Master looked pale. "Hagrid," McGonagall said quietly, "the creature has returned to the depths?" "Aye," he said, his voice low, "for now. But the curse is still with her, Professor. I tried to pull it free again, but it won't stay gone. Keeps finding its way back." Flitwick adjusted his spectacles, eyes narrowing toward the lake. "Such magic can't survive on its own. It needs a host. If the serpent was the vessel once, then it will seek her again and again until something stronger contains it." "Something stronger?" Hagrid echoed. "What could be stronger than that poor beast?" Flitwick hesitated. "A living wizard, with a will of iron, perhaps. But such a choice would be dangerous beyond measure." Madame Pomfrey stepped forward, pressing a vial into Hagrid's hand. "Drink this. It will slow the spread of the corruption in your arm. You're lucky the curse hasn't rooted itself fully." Hagrid nodded, swallowing the potion in one gulp. It burned like fire going down, but the throbbing under his skin eased slightly. "So what do we do now?" McGonagall's gaze was fixed on the horizon. "We contain it. Whatever power dwells in that water must not reach beyond it. Professor Flitwick will weave a barrier around the lake. Hagrid, I'll need your help patrolling the grounds while the spell takes hold. No student is to come near the shore, no matter the reason." "Aye, Professor," Hagrid said at once. "I'll see to it." For the rest of that day, the three of them worked tirelessly. Flitwick stood on the cliffs above the lake, his wand cutting patterns through the air, each stroke leaving trails of light that shimmered like threads of gold. McGonagall anchored the magic from the opposite bank, her spells joining his in a vast lattice that encircled the water. The air hummed with energy, the wind thick with power. Hagrid moved among them like a guardian spirit, his great frame silhouetted against the gray sky. He placed runestones at intervals along the shore, murmuring old words he'd learned from the centaurs, chants meant to steady the earth and calm the wildness of magic. By dusk, the barrier was complete. The surface of the lake glowed faintly under the fading light, as if a veil of glass lay stretched across it. McGonagall lowered her wand and exhaled. "It will hold," she said softly, "at least for a while." But Hagrid's eyes were fixed on the center of the lake. Beneath the enchanted shimmer, he thought he saw movement, a shadow sliding slowly through the deep. "She's still down there," he murmured, "still fighting it." McGonagall's face softened. "Then let us hope she wins." That night, the castle seemed to sleep uneasily. The wind rattled the windows, and the torches in the corridors burned low. In the great hall, even the portraits whispered among themselves, sensing the weight of the magic outside. Hagrid, however, did not sleep. He sat in his hut staring into the fire. Fang dozed at his feet, but every now and then the dog lifted his head and growled softly at nothing. The flicker of the flames painted long shadows across the walls, and in the midst of the warmth, Hagrid felt a chill creeping through the room. Then he heard it, the faintest whisper. At first he thought it was the wind, but the voice was too clear, too deliberate. It came from somewhere deep inside his mind, soft as water over stone. "Guardian of beasts, you tore me from my home." Hagrid froze, his heart hammered in his chest. "Who's there?" he said aloud, rising from his chair. The voice did not answer, but the air seemed to darken. The fire guttered, throwing off sparks. He felt a pressure behind his eyes, like a weight pressing inward. Then the whisper came again, this time from all around him. "You freed me once, and I was bound again. You think chains and spells can hold what was born from darkness itself?" Hagrid gritted his teeth. "You won't get back in me head, you hear? I know what ye are." A faint laugh rippled through the hut, cold and hollow. "Do you? The serpent was merely my shell. I am older than her kind, older than your castle, your forest, your pitiful charms. I am what the lake hides and what the deep remembers." The flames flared bright blue, then went out altogether. Only moonlight filtered through the window now, silver and cold. In its glow, Hagrid thought he saw a shadow take form near the hearth, a tall, thin figure made of mist, its eyes burning red like embers beneath the water. He snatched up his umbrella, holding it between them. "Back off," he growled. "I won't let you near the lake again." The figure tilted its head. "You already have." And then it was gone. The air cleared. The fire sputtered back to life, crackling weakly. Hagrid stood for a long while, breathing hard, his knuckles white around the handle of his umbrella. When he finally sat down again, Fang crept closer and rested his head against Hagrid's knee. "It's not done with us, Fang," Hagrid murmured. "Not by a long shot." By morning, the signs were clear. The lake's glow had faded. The barrier that Flitwick and McGonagall had woven now shimmered, only faintly, its edges fraying like old cloth. Something beneath was pushing against it, testing for weakness. Hagrid hurried up to the castle. He found McGonagall in the great hall, already speaking with Flitwick and Sprout. The little charms master looked grim. The barrier's failing faster than I expected. The energy inside is corrupting the spell work itself. Sprout wrung her hands. The plants along the shore are withering. Whatever that thing is, it's poisoning the ground. McGonagall turned to Hagrid. What happened last night? He hesitated, then said quietly, "It spoke to me." Her eyes widened. It spoke? What did it say? Called itself the Deep, said it was older than the castle, older than us all. I think it's trying to find a new vessel, Professor. The serpent ain't enough for it anymore. McGonagall's jaw tightened. Then we must find where it's trying to go and stop it before it takes root again. Flitwick climbed onto a bench, his small face set with fierce determination. If it's looking for power, it will seek out the strongest magical source nearby. That means Hogwarts itself. A hush fell over the hall. The enchanted ceiling above flickered, clouds gathering where stars should have been. McGonagall's eyes met Hagrid's. Then the fight has come home. Outside, thunder rumbled over the mountains. The wind swept through the towers, carrying with it the faint, mournful cry of something fast moving beneath the lake. And in the deepest chamber of the castle, unseen and untouched for centuries, the faintest ripple stirred the still air, as though something ancient had begun to wake. The storm broke over Hogwarts before dawn. Rain swept across the battlements, rattling windows and sending curtains of mist rolling down from the mountains. The lake churned under the weight of the wind, waves lashing against the shore like claws. Lightning split the clouds, forking silver light across the black waters. And in every flash, the professors saw shapes moving beneath the surface, vast and sinuous. Inside the castle, the air was heavy with tension. The portraits muttered among themselves, whispering about the darkness from the depths and the curse that stirs. Students huddled in the great hall where McGonagall had ordered them to stay until further notice. The long tables had been cleared away, replaced by rows of blankets and lanterns that flickered weakly against the gloom. Hagrid stood by the tall windows, his massive hands clenched behind his back. Each rumble of thunder made his chest tighten, for he could feel the storm echoing in his blood. The curse in his arm had begun to pulse again, faint but insistent, like the heartbeat of something waiting below. "Professor," said Neville Longbottom, stepping hesitantly up beside him. "Is it true? The creature's back?" Hagrid glanced down at him. "Aye," he said softly, "but it ain't her fault. She's been bound by something older than anything we've seen. I'm afraid it's after more than just her now." Neville swallowed. "The students are scared. Even the suits of armor are twitching." Hagrid gave him a weary smile. "Reckon they've got good reason." At that moment, McGonagall entered, her robes soaked from the rain. Every eye turned toward her. "The barrier around the lake has fallen," she announced, voice steady, though her face was pale. "Professor Flitwick and I will attempt to rebuild it, but we can no longer guarantee the creature will remain contained. All students are to stay within the Great Hall. Prefects will maintain order. No one leaves. Not for any reason." The room erupted into anxious murmurs. Hagrid stepped forward. "Professor, let me help. If that thing's rising again, I'll go down myself and face it." McGonagall shook her head sharply. "Absolutely not. You've already been marked by the curse once, and it has not let go. If it finds you again, it may claim you instead." "Then who's going to stop it?" Hagrid demanded.
"If it's reaching for the castle, then we will stop it together," she interrupted, her eyes fierce, but not recklessly. Even as she spoke, a deep vibration ran through the floor. The lanterns flickered. Somewhere in the distance, stone cracked. The castle itself groaned. The tremor passed, Bakrai, but left a silence heavier than before. In the corner, Luna Lovegood rose from where she had been sitting with a group of frightened first years. Her pale eyes were distant, unfocused. "It's not the serpent anymore," she said quietly. "It's coming through her. It's something behind her, something ancient." "What do you mean, Luna?" Neville asked, frowning. She turned toward the window. Rain streamed down the glass, distorting the view of the lake below. "I can hear it calling. It's older than the school, older than the stones. It doesn't want to destroy, it wants to feed." Flitwick, who had just entered carrying a stack of runic parchments, froze. "Feed?" he echoed. Luna nodded. "On magic, on life. It's hungry." A heavy silence followed. Then from outside there came a crash, like the breaking of mountains. The window panes burst inward. A surge of black water exploded into the hall, sweeping across the floor. Students screamed, scrambling for higher ground. Hagrid lunged forward, shielding a group of first years behind his vast frame as the flood roared around his legs. From the torrent rose a shape, a column of liquid darkness, shifting and writhing. For an instant, it bore the faint outline of the serpent's head, but its eyes burned brighter now, crimson and merciless. McGonagall raised her wand. "Protego Maxima!" A shimmering barrier of light erupted across the hall, forcing the water back. The creature hissed, its voice like steel, dragged across stone. "You cannot hide behind walls of light," it whispered, though its mouth did not move. "You brought me forth, and now I will drink from your tower's heart." Flitwick darted forward, wand flashing. "Arctis Lumen!" The spell struck the creature, freezing part of its form into jagged ice. But the ice melted instantly, dissolving into steam. The shadow laughed, a deep and terrible sound. Hagrid roared and charged, swinging his pink umbrella like a hammer. "Get out of this castle!" The umbrella burst with light, sending a shock wave through the hall. The water recoiled, shrieking, and splattered against the far wall. For a moment, the hall was clear again. But Hagrid staggered, clutching his arm. The red veins beneath his skin were blazing now, the curse feeding on his own magic. McGonagall seized his shoulder. "You can't use your power against it. It's drawing from you." "I don't care," Hagrid growled through his teeth. "I'll not let it near the students." But the creature was not gone. The puddles on the floor quivered, gathering once more into a single form that stretched toward the ceiling. Tendrils of shadow crawled along the walls, reaching for the torches, snuffing them out one by one. Flitwick shouted something in Latin, his wand carving glowing sigils in the air. The symbols spun like burning wheels, forming a cage of light around the darkness. For a moment, the spell held. The creature writhed and thrashed, hissing in fury. Then the floor shook again. Cracks split the stone beneath their feet, and from the fissures rose another rush of water. The lights flickered, dimmed, and the cage shattered. The shadow burst free with a roar that shook the very rafters. McGonagall raised her wand again, her face pale but resolute. "Everyone, to the upper halls," she commanded. "Prefects, lead the students. Go!"
The older students herded the younger ones toward the doors, shouting over the chaos. The professors formed a line between them and the monster, wands blazing. Hagrid stood his ground, his boots braced in the water. "Go on, Professor," he rumbled. "I'll hold it here." McGonagall's jaw tightened. "You will do no such thing alone." She turned to Flitwick. "We need to force it back into the lake." The Charms Master nodded grimly. Together they raised their wands, channeling beams of pure light that struck the creature's mass, pushing it inch by inch toward the shattered windows. The storm outside screamed, the wind howling as if the castle itself was fighting for breath. "Now, Hagrid," McGonagall shouted. He drove forward, every muscle straining, and slammed the butt of his umbrella into the floor. The ground shuddered. A surge of power erupted, merging with the professor's spells, and for one blinding moment the great hall was filled with light. Pure, searing white that burned away the shadow's edges. The creature gave a final, shattering cry as it was driven back through the broken windows and out into the storm. The wind howled louder, then fell silent. Only the rain remained. Hagrid collapsed to one knee, gasping. His arms smoked faintly, the curse marks dimming but not gone. McGonagall and Flitwick rushed to his side, both trembling from exhaustion. "Is it gone?" Flitwick whispered. McGonagall looked toward the lake. Through the shattered window, they could see only the restless surface of the water, black and churning. No red light, no voice. "For now," she said quietly. But far out on the water, a single ripple spread outward, slow and deliberate. Beneath it, faint as the beat of a distant drum, came the echo of something ancient stirring once more. Hagrid clenched his fist. "If it's not finished," he murmured, "then neither am I." The storm raged on, and the darkness beneath the lake whispered, waiting for its next chance to rise. The dawn that followed the storm was gray and thin, the kind of morning where even the light seemed weary. The lake was calm again, deceptively smooth, and the castle's stone walls dripped with rain. Yet every soul within Hogwarts knew the calm did not mean safety. There was a heaviness in the air, an invisible pressure that made the candles sputter and the staircases creak, as though the castle itself sensed the wrongness brewing in its heart. Hagrid stood on the wet grass outside the great hall, staring at the lake. His coat was torn at the shoulder, his arm still bandaged, and his face looked older than it had the night before. The storm had passed, but the battle had left its mark on him. He could still feel the curse pulsing faintly beneath the skin of his arm, a restless echo like the heartbeat of the deep itself. Behind him came the soft swish of robes. "You should rest," said Professor McGonagall's voice, quiet but firm. She joined him at the water's edge, her eyes sharp and weary. "You've done enough for one night." Hagrid shook his head. "Not near enough, Professor. Whatever's in there, it ain't gone. It's hiding, waiting." She followed his gaze toward the lake where the morning mist still clung to the surface. "I know, but if we are to face it again, we must understand it first. Knowledge is our shield now." "Aye," said Hagrid, "and we'll need all the shielding we can get." Later that morning, the professors gathered in the headmistress's office. The portraits of former headmasters and headmistresses murmured uneasily, their painted faces drawn. The faint ticking of Dumbledore's old instruments filled the air. Flitwick was the first to speak. "The wards I placed around the lake collapsed from within. That shouldn't be possible unless the force beneath it was older than the spells themselves. Sprout nodded grimly. The plants near the water's edge have died. Their roots were burned, not by heat, but by something dark, something that drained them. It's feeding, said McGonagall, as Miss Lovegood suggested. But on what, precisely? Aye, on what? Said Hagrid. He had squeezed himself awkwardly into one of the office chairs, which creaked alarmingly under his weight. It's not just magic, is it? Feels like it's drawn from life itself. At this, a quiet voice spoke from the shadows near the door. It is, said Luna Lovegood, stepping forward. She was pale and barefoot, her robes damp from the rain. It's the Deep One. McGonagall frowned. The what? Luna's gaze seemed far away, as if she were staring into some memory only she could see. There are stories in old wizarding folklore, stories of the Deep One, a being that lives beneath the great lakes and seas. They say it's not truly alive, but something older, a shadow of the first magic that ever existed. It sleeps beneath the waters, feeding on what drifts near. But sometimes, when great power gathers above it, then it wakes. Flitwick adjusted his spectacles nervously. And you believe this? This Deep One is what possessed the serpent? Luna nodded solemnly. The Athenin was a guardian. She tried to keep it sealed, but the wars, the curses, the spells cast into the lake, they weakened the bindings. The Deep One must have slipped through the cracks, and when Hagrid removed the shard, it found its way free. McGonagall finished softly. Silence followed, heavy and cold. Even the portraits were quiet. So, said Hagrid at last, if this thing's older than our magic, how do we stop it? Luna met his eyes. You can't destroy it. You can only bind it again. But the binding must be done by someone who the creature cannot consume. Meaning? Someone whose heart it cannot corrupt. Someone whose power isn't built on ambition or fear. Someone who acts only out of care. Hagrid blinked. You mean... Yes, said Luna gently. You. McGonagall shook her head at once. Absolutely not. Hagrid has already been marked by the curse once. We cannot risk... But Flitwick interrupted, his small voice grave. She may be right. The rest of us are bound to the castle, to our wands, to our magic. But Hagrid's power... It's older, wilder, closer to nature. That may be why the creature hasn't taken him already. Hagrid felt the weight of their eyes upon him. He swallowed, his throat dry. If it's me job, then it's me job, he said quietly. I've never turned from a creature in pain, and I won't start now. McGonagall's lips thinned, but she said nothing. That evening, as twilight bled across the sky, Hagrid made ready. He gathered what tools he thought he might need: a coil of rope, blessed by the centaurs, a lantern from the Mer people's ruins, and his umbrella, still faintly glowing from the last battle. Fang whined as he packed, sensing the danger ahead. "Stay here, boy," Hagrid said, kneeling to scratch the dog's ears. "Guard the hut for me. I'll be back before morning." The lake was a mirror of dying light when he reached it. The last rays of sunset glimmered on the water's surface like embers scattered across black glass. He waded in slowly, the cold biting into his legs. Beneath the surface, the water glowed faintly blue, a sign that the serpent was near. "Hagrid!" a voice called. He turned to see Neville running toward him, wand drawn, breath misting in the chill air. "You can't go down there alone." Hagrid smiled faintly. "I have her, lad. This is me job, not yours." Neville shook his head. "You helped me once, remember? When I couldn't face my fears? Let me return the favor." Before Hagrid could protest, Luna appeared beside Neville, her hair shining silver in the fading light. "You'll need a guide," she said softly. I can hear her calling again. "The Guardian, she's waiting for you below." Hagrid hesitated, torn between his instinct to protect them and the truth that they might be right. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but stay close, and if things go bad, you swim up fast as you can." The three of them waded into the lake together, the water rising higher until it closed over their heads. They sank into darkness. The world below was silent and vast. Their wands glowed like stars, casting long beams through the deep. Shapes drifted in the water, ruins of old magic, forgotten statues cloaked in weeds, remnants of battles long past. And then, far below, they saw her, the Ethonan serpent, coiled around the shattered stones of a sunken temple. Her eyes glimmered faintly gold again, but her body was pale, trembling. When she saw Hagrid, she lifted her head weakly. "Poor girl," Hagrid murmured through the bubble of air around his face. "I'm here now. I'll get you free." But as he reached out, the water around them darkened. From the cracks in the temple floor, shadows began to pour, thick, twisting currents of blackness that moved like smoke. Luna's voice echoed faintly. "It's coming." A low rumble filled the water, not a sound but a feeling, a vibration deep in their bones. The serpent shuddered, her eyes flaring red once more. Then the deep one rose. It was not a creature, not truly. It was a presence, vast and shapeless, a darkness that filled the water like ink. Within its depths, faint faces seemed to turn. Not human, not beast, but something between. It spoke without words, its voice filling every mind. "You would chain me again, little keeper of beasts." Hagrid gritted his teeth. "You've heard enough of this world. Back to the dark with ye." The shadow coiled around him, testing, whispering. "You could rule them, half-giant. All beasts would bow, the forests, the mountains, the deep, all yours." He clenched his fists. "I don't want power. I want peace." Then he drove the tip of his umbrella into the lake bed. Light burst forth, golden and wild, not clean and perfect like a wizard's spell, but raw and living, filled with earth and flame, and all the stubborn kindness that made Hagrid who he was. The deep one screamed. The serpent reared, her body blazing silver once more. Luna and Neville held fast, channeling what light they could through their wands, their faces pale but determined. The darkness writhed, recoiling. The water boiled with its fury. Then, with a roar that shook the depths, the deep one split apart like mist before the sun and was gone. The water fell still. The serpent coiled once more around the ruins. Her eyes gentle now, she lowered her great head toward Hagrid, and he felt a warmth pass through him, a healing light that chased the last of the curse from his arm. He smiled, tears glinting in his eyes. "There now," he whispered, "that's better." Slowly the three of them rose toward the surface, the dark fading behind them. Above, the stars were waiting, and in the stillness of the lake, the ancient magic settled again, not gone, but bound. When the three of them broke the surface of the black lake, dawn had already begun to bloom over the hills. The first pale light spilled across the water, glimmering like silver threads through the mist. Hagrid gasped, dragging in a great breath of air, and pulled Luna and Neville toward the shore. They stumbled out of the lake, soaked and trembling, collapsing onto the wet grass. For a long time, none of them spoke. They simply lay there, breathing hard, listening to the faint lapping of the water and the distant cry of a waking bird. The castle loomed above them, serene once more, its towers shining faintly in the morning light. No trace remained of the storm or the battle that had raged the night before. It might have been any peaceful morning at Hogwarts, except for the faint shimmer that still lingered on the lake's surface, like a veil of power settling back into place. Neville sat up first, rubbing his arms. Did we really do it? He asked softly, his voice trembling. Hagrid nodded slowly. Aye, lad. It's done. The deep one's bound again, deep as it should be. The serpent's resting now, too. She'll keep watch for a long while, I reckon. Luna gazed out across the lake, her expression distant, dreamlike. It feels different, she murmured. Quieter. The water's breathing again. For a moment they sat in silence, watching the sunrise. The light grew stronger, burning the mist away, revealing the ripples that spread lazily across the calm expanse. Neville turned to Hagrid. What was that light you used? It wasn't any spell I've ever seen. Hagrid smiled faintly. Wasn't a spell, not really. It's old magic. Older than wands, older than any of us. I just asked the earth to help me. She listened. He rubbed his arm absently where the red scars from the curse had faded to pale lines. Magic like that don't come from books. Comes from the heart, I suppose. Luna smiled softly. The deep one couldn't take your heart because it isn't made of the kind of power it understands. You care too deeply, Hagrid. That's what saved us. He blushed beneath his beard, grumbling something unintelligible, and got to his feet. Come on, we'd best tell Professor McGonagall before she thinks we've been eaten. By the time they reached the castle gates, the great doors opened with a creak. McGonagall stood there, her robes immaculate despite the sleepless night, though the relief in her eyes betrayed her worry. Behind her were Flitwick and Sprout, both pale and anxious. Hagrid, McGonagall breathed. Thank heavens, we feared the worst when we saw the lights in the lake. It's all right now, Professor, Hagrid said. The deep one's gone, bound again just like before. Flitwick blinked up at him, astonished. Bound? By what means? Hagrid looked uncomfortable. Bit hard to explain. I just talked to it, showed it didn't belong here no more. The serpent helped. She's free of the curse now. McGonagall regarded him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You've done what none of us could. Again. Sprout patted his massive arm. We'll need to tend to the lakeshore. Whatever dark residue remains, it could harm the plants, or worse. Hagrid nodded. I'll see to that myself. Inside the castle had begun to stir with life. Students peered cautiously from the stairways as news spread that the danger had passed. By breakfast, the great hall was alive again, with the clatter of dishes and the hum of voices, nervous, curious, but alive. Hagrid took his usual seat at the staff table. Neville and Luna joined the Gryffindor and Ravenclaw tables, where they were immediately surrounded by eager faces, demanding to know what had happened. But neither of them spoke much. The weight of what they had seen was too fresh to share in idle words. McGonagall rose and lifted her voice above the din. Students of Hogwarts, she began, you have endured fear and uncertainty these past days. But I am pleased to tell you that the threat to our school has been vanquished. Professor Hagrid, with the aid of a few brave students, has restored peace to the lake and to the grounds. The hall broke into applause. Hagrid shifted uncomfortably, cheeks reddening as hundreds of eyes turned toward him. "Ah, come now," he mumbled, waving a hand. "Weren't nothing, really." But even the ghosts applauded, and nearly headless Nick floated down from the rafters, bowing deeply. "A triumph, my dear man. A true triumph." That night, when the castle slept and the torches burned low, Hagrid returned to the lake shore alone. The water shimmered under the moonlight, calm as glass. He knelt at the edge, resting his hand on the damp stones. "I hope you find peace down there," he said quietly. "You deserve it." The lake did not answer, but from the depths came a faint flicker of light, golden and slow like the blink of a great eye. Weeks passed, and the shadow of the storm faded into memory. Winter settled over the grounds, frosting the towers with white and laying quiet upon the forbidden forest. Students whispered stories about the water monster, though few knew the truth. Some claimed Hagrid had tamed a dragon in the lake. Others said he had fought a ghostly giant made of mist. Hagrid, for his part, said little. He was content to let the legends grow. But though peace had returned, he could not shake the feeling that the Deep One was not truly gone. Sometimes, late at night, when the moon hung low and the water gleamed silver, he would stand at his door and listen. And every now and then he thought he heard it, the faintest echo like a heartbeat far below the waves. One evening Luna came to visit. She brought with her a small jar of light, a silvery, softly glowing substance that pulsed like the rhythm of a sleeping creature. "It's from the lake," she explained. "The serpent left it behind. The mer people say it's the essence of her guardianship. I think she wanted you to have it." Hagrid took the jar gently, as though afraid to break it. "That's kind of her. Reckon I'll keep it safe." He placed it on his shelf beside a carved stone from the centaurs and a feather from Buckbeak. The light from the jar bathed the hut in a soft glow, warm and calm. "You'll watch over it, won't you?" Luna asked. "Always," Hagrid said. She smiled, her eyes full of knowing. "Then she's at peace." When she was gone, Hagrid sat before the fire, Fang asleep at his feet. The hut was quiet, the lake outside whispering softly to itself. He looked at the glowing jar and thought of all the creatures he had loved and lost. The dragons, the giants, the beasts no one else understood. "World's full of monsters," he said softly, stroking Fang's head. "But most of them just need someone to care." Outside, the wind sighed through the reeds, and the faint ripple of the water answered like a lullaby. For now, the darkness beneath Hogwarts slept once more. But deep in the lake's cold heart, older than spells and older than the castle itself, something ancient dreamed of light and fire, and of the gentle giant who had defied it. And though the story of the water monster would pass into legend, Hagrid would never forget the voice of the deep, nor the golden eyes that had watched him from the dark. He would remember always. Winter deepened around Hogwarts, and the castle stood like a crown of frost upon the white hills. Snow blanketed the lawns and weighed upon the branches of the forbidden forest, muffling the sounds of creatures within. The lake froze along its edges, a glassy crust that sparkled beneath the weak sun, though the center never hardened completely. Beneath that dark heart, old magic still breathed, slow and deep. The storm and the monster had become stories now, retold by candlelight in the common rooms. The younger students spoke of a colossal serpent that guarded treasure under the lake. The older ones whispered that Hagrid had battled a ghost born of the Founder's forgotten spells. Truth turned to myth As it always did at Hogwarts, Hagrid didn't mind. He had never cared for glory. What mattered was that the water lay quiet and the air above it smelled of peace once more. Each morning he walked the snowy grounds, scattering feed for the thestrals and leaving meat for the hippogriffs that sheltered in the forest edge. The centaurs nodded gravely when they saw him pass, for even they knew the tale that had reached their glades. But though peace reigned, a shadow still lingered in Hagrid's mind. Now and then, as he looked out across the lake, he fancied he saw faint ripples spreading outward from the center, as if something below had stirred in its sleep. It was not fear he felt, but a solemn knowing, an understanding that old things never truly vanished. They simply waited. One evening, near the end of term, he was stacking logs beside his hut when he heard footsteps crunching through the snow. Turning, he saw Neville Longbottom approaching, wrapped in a thick cloak, his breath misting in the cold. "Evening, Neville," Hagrid called, brushing the frost from his beard. "What brings you out this way? Shouldn't you be packing for the holidays?" Neville smiled, though his eyes were thoughtful.
"I wanted to see the lake one more time before I go home. It feels different now, like it's listening." Hagrid nodded. "Aye, that's the way of things. Magic don't die easy. It just changes its tune." They stood side by side, gazing across the expanse of ice and water. The moon had risen full and pale, painting the surface in silver. Somewhere deep below, the Athonan serpent moved like a ghost through the depths. Neville hesitated, then said, "Professor McGonagall told me you've still got that light, the one Luna brought from the lake." Hagrid's eyes softened. "Aye. Keep it on the shelf by my fire. Brightens the place a bit. Reminds me that even dark water's got its spark of good left in it." Neville nodded, then looked down. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. You risked everything to save something most people would have called a monster." Hagrid chuckled, a deep, warm sound. There's no such thing as monsters, not really. Only creatures hurt bad enough they forget how to be kind." Neville smiled faintly, as though those words had taken root in him. Then after a pause, he asked quietly, "Do you ever think it might come back?" Hagrid looked toward the lake, where the mist clung like breath upon glass. "Maybe. But if it does, I'll be here. We'll all be here. Hogwarts has a way of standing against the dark, no matter how many times it knocks." They parted soon after, and Neville's footsteps faded toward the castle. Hagrid lingered a while longer, his gaze lost in the shifting gleam of moonlight on ice. At last he turned back to his hut, the cold wind tugging at his coat, the snow crunching beneath his boots. Inside, the warmth welcomed him. The fire burned low, casting soft light upon the wooden walls. Fang thumped his tail lazily from his bed, and on the shelf the jar Luna had given him glowed gently, steady as a heartbeat. Hagrid settled into his chair, the familiar creak of it comforting. He reached for the jar and turned it slowly in his great hands. The silvery light shimmered within, swirling like mist over water. It pulsed once, faintly, as if it recognized his touch. "Still keeping watch, eh?" he murmured. "Good on you, girl." He set it back, watching it for a while. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window, glinting like sparks in the firelight. Hours later, when he finally rose to stoke the fire, something odd caught his eye. The glow in the jar flickered, once, twice, then steadied again. Hagrid frowned. It might have been his imagination, or perhaps just a trick of the fire.
But as he leaned closer, he thought he heard a faint hum like a lullaby from the deep. He straightened, uneasy. "No," he muttered to himself, "you're just tired, that's all." Yet when he looked toward the lake again, a ripple broke the perfect stillness of its surface. Only one, gentle and small, but in that quiet night, it seemed to echo for a very long time. The next morning brought fresh snow and a restless feeling that spread through the castle like a whisper. Some students complained of strange dreams, of vast waters and golden eyes watching from the dark. Others said the mer people had been singing again, their voices low and mournful. Professor McGonagall dismissed it all as winter nerves, but Hagrid's heart grew heavy. He went often to the lake shore, walking its perimeter in silence, boots crunching through the snow. He saw no sign of trouble, but the sense of something watching never left him. One night, unable to sleep, he went out again with his lantern. The stars burned cold above, and the frozen air nipped at his beard. Down by the shore, frost rimed every stone, glinting like diamonds. The lake was utterly still. Then as he stood there, a light shimmered beneath the ice. It was soft at first, a faint pulse deep below, but soon it grew brighter, spreading outward like veins of silver fire. The glow traced old runes across the frozen surface, markings that pulsed in rhythm with the jar's light back in his hut. Hagrid's breath caught. "Ah, no," he whispered, "not again." He stepped forward, the lantern shaking in his hand. The ice beneath his boots thrummed softly like the beat of a distant drum. And then, faint and clear, he heard it, the serpent's song, not the terrible cry of pain from before, but a low, haunting melody that carried through the still air. It was a warning. The light dimmed, fading into darkness once more, leaving only his reflection on the ice. Hagrid stared down at it, heart pounding, then turned back toward the castle, his mind already racing. By dawn, he was in McGonagall's office, his cloak dusted with snow. She listened in silence as he spoke, her expression grave. "When we bound the deep one," he finished, "we might have just driven it deeper, not destroyed it. Now the Guardian's stirring again. She's trying to hold it down, but something's changing down there." McGonagall pressed her lips together. "Then we'll be ready. Hogwarts has faced darker things and endured." "Aye," Hagrid said, gazing out the window toward the Glinton Lake. "But this time the dark's already part of the water." The old bell tolled across the grounds, echoing off the snowy hills. Students hurried to lessons, laughter breaking briefly through the chill air. The castle seemed alive again, bright and strong, but beneath its foundations the deep water murmured softly, ancient and patient, dreaming still. And as Hagrid walked back to his hut, the faintest tremor rippled across the lake behind him, small, harmless, almost tender, yet in that motion lingered the promise that the story of the water monster was not finished. Not yet. The winter at Hogwarts deepened into February, and though the snow lay thick upon the hills, and the roofs glittered with frost, the heart of the castle felt uneasy. The lake had frozen fully now, or so it seemed, a smooth, gleaming mirror beneath the cold sun. But every few nights, the silence of the grounds was broken by a faint, distant sound. Some said it was the ice cracking. Others whispered that it was breathing. Hagrid knew better. He had spent many evenings by the lake since that night of warning, his lantern glowing softly against the white. The ripples had not returned, but the stillness was worse. There was a weight in the air, like the calm before a storm that the sky had forgotten to bring. Fang would not go near the shore anymore, whining and tugging at his lead whenever they drew close. Even the centaurs, proud and fearless, had stopped their patrols near the water. One evening, a bitter wind swept down from the mountains, carrying with it a smell of iron and rain. Hagrid stood on the edge of the frozen lake, snow crunching under his boots. The clouds above were heavy, pressing low against the horizon. In the distance he saw torches flickering along the castle walls, the professors keeping watch. He sighed, pulling his coat tighter around him. "It's coming again," he murmured. That night, he dreamed of the serpent. He saw her vast and silver beneath the ice, her coils moving slowly through the dark water, her eyes glowing gold. She was singing, though the sound was not made for human ears. And behind her, vast and shapeless, something stirred. A shadow stretching like smoke through the black. He woke before dawn, the echo of that song still humming in his bones. By the time the first light touched the mountains, he was climbing the stairs to the headmistress's office once more. McGonagall was already awake, standing before the fire, her tartan dressing gown wrapped tightly about her shoulders. "I was expecting you," she said quietly. "There's been movement. The Mer people sent word at dawn." Hagrid's stomach tightened.
"What sort of movement?" "They say the serpent is rising again, but this time she is not alone." He stared at her. "Not alone?" McGonagall turned to face him fully. "The Deep One is reforming. They can feel it stirring beneath the temple. The bindings you wove are breaking." Hagrid sank heavily into a chair, running a hand through his beard. "Then it's my fault. I should have—" She cut him off. "You saved this school, Hagrid. Whatever comes now is not your fault." He nodded, though guilt still gnawed at him. "What do we do?" Flitwick entered then, his face pale and drawn. "We can reinforce the wards around the lake," he said, "but only from within. The magic below is feeding on the old enchantments. If we're to stop it, we'll have to go down there again, to the very heart of the deep." "I'll go," said Hagrid at once. McGonagall hesitated. "You nearly died last time. And if I don't go, it'll happen again, only worse. This time I'll not face it alone, though. The serpent's still down there, trying to hold it back. Maybe if I reach her—" Flitwick nodded slowly. "Then perhaps the Guardian can help us restore the seal." That night the professors gathered at the lake. Snow drifted softly from the sky, muffling every sound. The students had been sent to their dormitories, though many crowded the tower windows, watching with wide eyes as the group of teachers stood at the water's edge, their wands glowing faintly in the dark. Hagrid stepped forward carrying his lantern and his umbrella. The frozen surface cracked beneath his boots as he walked out onto it. The wind howled through the pines, carrying whispers that might have been voices. "Ready, Professor?" Flitwick called, his wand poised. "As I'll ever be," Hagrid replied. He took a deep breath and brought the tip of his umbrella down upon the ice. The lake erupted in light. The surface split apart, shards of ice spinning outward, and the water glowed with the same golden fire that had burned there once before. The professors cast their charms in unison, the air alive with magic. Then Hagrid dove, the cold closing over him like a fist. The descent was longer this time. The water was darker, heavier, thick with the weight of something ancient. He could feel it pulling at him, whispering in the corners of his mind. "You could have ruled," the voice murmured. "You could have commanded the depths." "Don't want it," Hagrid growled.
never did. The ruins appeared ahead, faintly lit, the same temple, now cracked and overgrown. And there she was, the Athonan serpent, her great body coiled protectively around the fissure from which the darkness seeped. Her eyes were dim, her movements slow. "Easy, girl," Hagrid said softly, swimming closer. "I'm here to help you again." As he reached out, the serpent lifted her head. A low, mournful sound rippled through the water. Beneath her coils, the fissure widened, and from it poured a smoke so dark it seemed to swallow light itself. The deep one had awakened. It rose through the water, formless yet vast, its edges melting into the black. Within it shimmered faint faces, not human, not beast, but echoes of both. "You cannot bind me again, creature of flesh," it hissed, its voice inside his skull. "You are part of me now." "Not anymore," Hagrid said, gripping the serpent's scales. "You don't belong here." The shadow surged forward, coiling around him. The water froze where it touched his skin, ice crawling across his arm. He could feel it trying to burrow into his thoughts, twisting, tempting. "You care for them," it whispered. "The fragile, the small, the broken. But they will never understand you. I can give you a world that will." Hagrid clenched his jaw. "I don't need understanding, just a bit of kindness." He raised his umbrella, light gathering at its tip. Not the clean white of wizarding magic, but the golden glow of life, of warmth. The serpent's eyes flared, joining his light, their power mingling. Together they shone brighter, driving back the dark water. The deep one screamed, its voice shaking the ruins. The fissure beneath them began to close, the golden light sealing it like molten metal. "Back with ya!" Hagrid roared. "Back to where ye belong!" The serpent coiled tighter, her body blazing silver. The light erupted outward, filling the deep with fire and thunder. Hagrid felt the force tear at him, pulling, burning. But he held fast, his heart steady. Then came silence. When he opened his eyes, the shadow was gone. The fissure was sealed, its edges smooth and still. The serpent floated before him, her eyes soft and tired. She bowed her great head once, the gesture of a promise kept, then turned and slipped into the dark beyond, vanishing into legend once more. Hagrid drifted upward, the water warm now, golden light surrounding him like dawn. When he broke the surface, the professors were waiting, wands raised. McGonagall rushed forward as he pulled himself onto the shore. "It's done," he said simply. "She's gone home." For a long moment, no one spoke. The lake was quiet, the stars reflected perfectly upon its surface. Then Flitwick exhaled, and McGonagall placed a trembling hand upon Hagrid's arm. "You've done what no wizard could," she whispered. He smiled, weary but content. "Wasn't wizardry that did it, Professor. Just needed a bit of heart." The months that followed passed in peace. Spring came early, thawing the last of the snow. Flowers grew thick along the lake shore again, and the merpeople sang songs of gratitude that echoed through the waters. Sometimes on clear nights, Hagrid would sit by his hut, watching the stars reflected in the calm lake. The jar of light from Luna still glowed on his shelf, though softer now, as if it too was at rest. And deep beneath the water, far from sight and sound, the guardian serpent kept her vigil. The deep one was bound, sleeping in the folds of time. But should darkness ever rise again, the lake would remember. For now, peace had returned to Hogwarts. The tale of the water monster would be told for generations, of the half-giant who braved the deep, and the ancient creature who guarded the school's heart. And on quiet nights when the moon lay silver on the lake and the wind was still, some swore they heard a low hum from the depths, not of menace, but of gratitude. The guardian sang and the castle listened.